People who've gotten their bosses fired. How? One summer I volunteered to help a conservation society in East Africa. The aim of the project was to educate the local rural population about poaching and to get them to help us stop it from the ground up. Anyway, I was staying with the lead ranger and his family, and on numerous occasions he served us meat that I'm 100% sure was poached. He tried to tell me that it was pork, but it was dark and gamey with lots of small bones. I think that it was small antelope like dik or diker. When I returned to Nairobi, I mentioned to my grandpa, his boss's boss, that we'd eaten some odd meals. He investigated and found out that my boss had a poacher friend who was selling him illegal meat. He was fired. I didn't feel guilty. Poaching is awful. I left my last company due to a bully of a grams. Many people were leaving over him, causing problems. Being sexist, racist, doing things people could easily sue them for, claiming sexual harassment. List goes on. Everyone informed HR during their exit interviews. Hell, he even tried to make my exit interview not happen. Though they still weren't doing anything. I had been at my new job for a couple months now and was still getting complaints from my old team almost daily. So I made an email account and named concerned company name crew. Sent an email to everyone who had an email account within the company explaining what he still did with events spanning from his start to the day prior. They fired him within the week and my old crew thanked me. I took a phone call on my cell when at my desk. Middle manager came up and screamed at me, yelling about how I was not allowed to take calls for clients while at that office. I was a contractor and made it perfectly clear that I did work for multiple clients prior to doing work for this company. The CTO's office was 10 feet from mine. He came out and stood in his doorway listening to the rant. When the middle manager was done, I just looked over at the CTO and said, it's him or me, and at the moment I don't give a FCK which you pick. CTO walked the middle manager out right then. Funny thing, I didn't hang up throughout the incident. And it was my wife on the other end. I was spending about 70 hours a week at their site digging their staff out of a hole they had dug themselves in. It's him or me, and at the moment I don't give a FCK which you pick. Grass on your mountainous brass balls. Not my boss, but I helped my friend get her boss fired. He was a general manager. And always grabbing her sides. Purposely scheduling her to have shifts alone with him. Asking her for nudes. Asking her to sleep with him. Etc. She reported it so many times to the owner, big boss, and they said they couldn't do anything because they hadn't seen it and had no other reports other than her account. So I called and complained as a customer about how I witnessed him being creepy to her and how it made me uncomfortable. For the most part true lol. I just don't shop there. Not me. But my GF at the time. We were both working at a small burrito chain. She was front of house manager and I was kitchen manager. Above us was one senior manager and then the owner. We did tip pooling based on hours. And the senior manager always told my GF not to count the tips every night, as he divided it up at the end of the week. Well, of course she counted them every night. Turns out the senior manager was stealing almost $500 a week from employees and tips. And because his previous farm manager never questioned him, it had likely been going on for years. She told the owners and he was gone the next day. A week later his wife left him. Paranoid. Sociopath boss wiretapped all internal phone calls and made life miserable for all who worked in that department. After moving over 1,200 miles to the job location. Called wife frequently to discuss the job and family progress in moving there. During those calls, I spun a story about how all of his top managers were plotting against him, which enraged him and he took out his anger on them. Eventually they went to the company owner and complained. And he was fired the next day. I kept a detailed log of both of our times in and out of the office, as well as a detailed list of my work efforts. When I was called into HR to be fired, I produced the logs. I was given their position at the request of a former manager after HR fired my boss. He was presenting a PowerPoint that I had put together to all the managers in the building. There was something he wanted to add at the last minute that he had never told me about. And when it wasn't there, he verbally abused me for like 5 minutes straight. Yelling. Name calling. Telling me to prove to him that I had a college degree and wasn't just making it up. I was a contractor, so I was afraid to complain to HR because I assumed they'd just fire me. But a lot of other people in the room did. After the meeting, I went into the shared drive folder to find the presentation notes where the extra information was supposedly located. I watched the last time change from a day ago to the current time. Then he immediately called and said it was right there in the notes file. He was fired the next day for unprofessional behavior. He'd show up every day and tell us a tale of his Azul exploits. Whether true or not, none of us wanted to hear it. If an attractive looking female comes in, he drops what he's doing and stares at her, drooling like a dog in a dog treat factory. After she leaves, he had to say a comment about her appearance. After talking on the phone with a certain manager, he always comments on how nice her ass is. He'd bully us employees and other managers. Called us bitches a lot despite us getting onto him for it. My female co-worker reported him. We all had a phone meeting with our district manager and HR. He was suspended until the investigation was over and they ruled to terminate him. Surprisingly, HR worked for us that day. It was the night shift, and for years this F-King guy had been either locking himself in the office and playing video games all night, or going home and F-King sleeping on the clock, and no, I'm not making that up. Finally one night the regional manager showed up for a surprise visit at like 3 AM. It was a group effort. The night crew took great pleasure in telling the RM exactly where his night manager was. I found out she was inflating our numbers to make it look like we were hitting our daily and weekly goals by not turning in everyone's timesheets and covering the pay with petty cash. It all came crashing down on her when a bunch of people in our office didn't get their checks and she didn't have enough cash left to cover them. I called the regional manager, her boss, that night, and she was fired the next day. His boss asked me to keep tabs on him. He was working a fraction of his hours, salaried, calling an hourly guy so he could leave early. Not fired but demoted. I got fired and explained in my exit interview how the reason I wasn't making progress on my project is that I had no idea what I was doing. I was never trained. My WFH boss in another location took off for 4 hours a day to run errands and go to the gym, etc, etc. They checked my story out and ended up demoting my boss, taking her off the project, and taking away all her direct reports. My manager wanted to prove I'm slacking off so he could write me up. So he watched CCTV footages, then wrote, printed out and signed a detailed 17 pages worth of Word document. What did I do in the past 2 days? With timestamps, like 07:59 arriving, 08:01 speaking with co-worker A and B, 08:07 sitting down to my desk, etc. He told me that he's not happy with my work ethics if I won't improve my efficiency. I'm forward. Full stop. I took the papers and showed to his boss and told her that I'm not happy with my manager's work ethics and his efficiency might be better if he wouldn't watch 17 hours of CCTV footages to spy on an employee. She was terrified. It would have been a rock solid lawsuit for me, but I love my job, and we had to search for a new manager. Also, my salary raised. I've told this story a few times before, so I'll keep it short. I didn't get my boss fired, but she blames me. Boss and I didn't get along, but she didn't have the authority to fire me. But she promised her boyfriend my job, so she hires her boyfriend in another position, with the plan they'll drive me to quit, and then she can just promote him to my job. This lasted for about a month. She fired him when they broke up. He confessed their scheme to me on his way out. We'd actually become friends at this point, and I tell him he should really tell HR. HR does their investigation. She's fired because sleep with me and I'll give you a job is textbook sexual harassment. And she tells anyone who'll listen that it's all my fault because I didn't quit like I was supposed to. I didn't technically get her fired. But when she refused to hire me full time after 3 months on temporary like promised, I just said it wasn't worth it. Quit, and a week later about 30 people followed because they were getting similarly screwed. So they got rid of all of the management and transferred in new managers. He was stealing $5K in parts for his personal cars. He also was turning customers into cash jobs for a discount and then pocketing about half the money. I went to HR, asked the proper way to report theft. I followed what HR has said and then we were both fired. Best thing that ever happened to me tbh. Worked at a McDonald's in high school at 17. I was being sexually harassed by a co-worker twice my age. He said some really awful stuff to me that made me afraid to come to work. They refused to switch my shifts. They also were working me too much for being under 18 and tried to get me to sign a consent form saying I knew I'd be working the hours I was. When I constantly asked for different hours. I called the corporate offices and told them. My parents even got a lawyer involved. I quit, and a few weeks later a co-worker I went to school with said 2 of the shift managers, the supervisor, and the store manager were all terminated and barred from working with the company again. They brought in a few temporary people who were high up and ended up sniffing out the other bad employees.